What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Pick Six podcast. I am John Breech, and I am here with Tyler Sullivan. So, you know who is not here? That would be Will Brinson. I don't know. I heard he was on vacation, but I also heard that he was somewhere near Connecticut on Wednesday night, maybe sabotaging their plane so they couldn't get to the Final Four. I don't know what's true anymore. But you are here. Thanks for showing up, Sully.
Do you know in that scene in Goodfellas when he's in the shower and he's Jimmy, when he's hearing the radio about the bank heist or the airport heist? I feel like that was Brinson when he heard that UConn was having travel issues. He's like, yeah, NC State, let's go Wolfpack. I'm envisioning Brinson in the shower is a little weird, but again, that scene is burned into my brain with Brinson probably freaking out about UConn's travel issues.
That is already my favorite story of the podcast. We just stop now. And I'm sure that Brinson is somewhere. He actually paid me money to mention his name and NC State at the top of the show because he says it's good luck. But you know what? We're not talking about NC State today because Brinson's not here. And we're not talking about Brinson because Brinson's not here. We are talking about what teams still need to do on Tuesday. Leger Douzable and I covered all of the team needs in the NFC. And now Sully and I are going to run through the AFC. Now, Sully, we both know there was a huge trade in the AFC this week. And guess what? In a twist, we're not starting with the AFC South, the team that got Stephon Diggs, or the AFC East, the division that got rid of Stephon Diggs. We're going to start with the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs in their division, the AFC West. They have looked unstoppable in Kansas City for the past 2 years, 2 straight Super Bowls. Sully, what do the Chiefs still need to do to get better?
Yeah, I mean, we're nitpicking here, right? Because they are the back-to-back Super Bowl champions. They're still bringing back Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid's still there, Travis Kelce. But I still think that this team needs a wide receiver. I think that that's the position that they've somewhat addressed it this offseason by acquiring Hollywood Brown, but that's only on a short-term deal. We just saw what happened this week with Rashee Rice. We don't know if the league's going to get involved with that. That possibly could lead to a suspension. And this all just goes to show you that Patrick Mahomes still needs some weapons. I mean, we're looking at them as this next wave of a Patriots dynasty, right? And what did the Patriots do over the course of their run? They were able to kind of adapt things around Tom Brady. It was Troy Brown to start. Then it was Randy Moss and Wes Welker. And then it was Julian Edelman and Rob Gronkowski. They need to find that next iteration with Travis Kelce getting older. I believe he's going to be age 35 season coming up here. And so to me, if they can find a receiver in the draft, I think that would really help them continue this impressive run that they've been going on.
Yep. Travis Kelce, 34, turns 35 in October. And look, he looked tired in parts of last season. He looked like his age was catching up to him. And there was some speculation that, hey, maybe he's going to retire. He's dating Taylor Swift. His heart doesn't look like it's into it. But then he got to the playoffs, tore everything up, and all that speculation died down. I definitely agree with that they have to look to wide receiver for help. And who knows what they're going to do? Who knows what's going to be available to him at the bottom of the first round? But the one thing is that, like, if Patrick Mahomes is listening right now, he's just laughing. He's like, haha, that's what everyone said in 2022 and 2023, and we just keep winning. We got rid of Tyreek Hill. We still win. I think the other thing that they might want to take a look at is offensive tackle. I think you look at their left tackle situation specifically, Donovan Smith, not under contract anymore. Who knows what's going to happen there? I think that they have Wanya Morris penciled in to start. And look, I don't know if that's the answer right there. And so left tackle is not a question mark you want to have, especially when Patrick Mahomes doesn't have a security. He has Travis Kelce. He doesn't have kind of a receiver that he really trusts right now. So the Chiefs, definitely a couple question marks going into the draft.
And we would be remiss if we didn't mention cornerback as well, obviously. You know, you trade away L'Jarius Sneed after the franchise tag. You got to find another player to inject into that secondary. That can come via the draft. I know I've talked to you a bunch. I think Stephon Gilmore would make some sense there as well. They could find a veteran like that to inject into their secondary as well, but corner certainly a need for them.
The Chiefs don't look so invincible. Maybe somebody in the AFC West can knock them off. Maybe the Raiders, probably not, but they do have some needs. Obviously, a lot of needs. What do you think the biggest one is, Tyler? And I think we probably agree on this one.
It's quarterback, right? I mean, you're in a division with Patrick Mahomes, as we were just talking about. They're in a division with Justin Herbert. They need to find their counter to those two guys in the division. And, they bring in Gardner Minshew. I think that's totally fine. Aiden O'Connell had some moments last year. I think both of those players can be stopgap guys, but they're not the ones for Antonio Pierce to say, you know what, here's this dude I'm going into the trenches with, on a playoff run or anything along those lines. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they do in the NFL draft, where they're picking number 13 overall. It gets a little tricky, especially when we're talking about another team in this division that's coming up too. The Broncos, they might need a quarterback as well. They're picking number 12. But for me, if the things fall correctly for the Raiders, I wouldn't mind if they reached a little bit for Michael Penix Jr. or somebody like that, whether it's Bo Nix, any one of these prospects. I don't think that J.J. McCarthy's going to fall. I don't think Drake May or Jaden Daniels are getting out of the top 5. So without a trade-up, I would say Michael Penix would make a lot of sense for me here to give yourself a chance at getting an elite quarterback or higher quarterback play to compete in the division.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that goes to what the Raiders feel. If Antonio Pierce is going to go into this season thinking we're a playoff contender, even if the outside doesn't necessarily think that. And if you do think you're a playoff contender, then maybe you're not staying put. If you stay at 13, you're probably not taking a quarterback. You want to get somebody who can contribute this year. But I do agree that if they trade up, they're just in an awkward spot for needing a quarterback. 13th overall, especially when you're sitting there, as you mentioned, not just behind the Broncos, but behind the Vikings, also two other teams who could be looking to trade up. So it is not going to be easy for them to trade up. So yeah, quarterback definitely. And I do think if they stay put at 13, I wouldn't be surprised if they take a cornerback. They have a couple holes there. Obviously, Jack Jones has one side locked down, Nate Hobbs in there, but they definitely need somebody starting opposite Jack Jones. So taking a corner at 13, I don't think would be that crazy. And I think I feel like that would be their choice if they don't end up taking a quarterback. But I feel like those are their two biggest needs right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I would go with cornerback there. It's funny enough, I have a 7-round mock draft for the Raiders coming out tomorrow.
Ooh, what a teaser.
Also, offensive tackle, too. They lost Jermaine Illuminor in free agency to the New York Giants. They could use a right tackle. At some point, they need to figure that out, and especially if they draft a left-handed quarterback, that's basically their blindside tackle. So that would be another one where this is a deep tackle class. That could be another position that maybe you look at if somebody falls there at number 13.
We just talked about the Raiders who need a quarterback. So let's go to another team that needs a quarterback, and that is the Denver Broncos. They decided to take a monstrous dead cap hit and get rid of Russell Wilson, and now they're in QB purgatory. So is that their biggest need, or do you look at the roster and you think, man, maybe Jarrett Stidham can get this team to the playoffs?
The last time I was a believer in Jarrett Stidham, I was still figuring out life post Tom Brady in New England here, thinking that before Cam Newton came along, I'm like, maybe Jarrett Stidham's the guy. Maybe they have a plan all along. Turns out the Patriots didn't. And I'm not falling for that twice. He flashed. He's been a good pro in the NFL, Jarrett Stidham has. And I think that could he be kind of that equivalent to Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell in Denver? Sure. I think that that's totally fair. I think he could be that stopgap guy. But the ceiling for him and the ceiling of a Jarrett Stidham-led Broncos team, I don't think is particularly high. That's why I think both of these teams are kind of fascinating to watch, because not only are they division rivals, but they're in search of the same thing in the NFL draft, and they're number 12 overall, number 13 overall. They are like neck and neck the entire way. So is someone going to leap over someone else? Maybe the Jets at number 10 if a quarterback falls to that spot. I think it's going to be really interesting. And so I'm curious to see what Sean Payton does. It's clearly quarterback, because you have to try to figure that out. He did not come back to coach Jarrett Stidham, Sean Payton. He came back to coach a contending team with an elite quarterback. And so if there's one that he sees, again, whether that's Michael Penix, Bo Nix, or if J.J. McCarthy falls for some reason that we don't foresee, that's the route I think they go down.
Yeah, I think that too. But like the Raiders, they're just in that awkward situation where you don't know for sure that you're going to be able to trade up, especially sitting behind the Vikings, who have 2 first-round picks, have a lot more ammo to make a big move. And then if you sit there at 12, you don't know who's going to fall in your lap. And so it's really dicey. I do agree with you that I think the Broncos are going to do whatever they can to take a quarterback, but maybe if they can't trade up and they're stuck picking at 12, I think they could go the same route as the Raiders and take a quarterback, corner, not a quarter, because you do have some top 15 corners. I don't think that this draft is great for corners as far as maybe first round goes, but I think you have Quenya Mitchell, you have Terrion Arnold, two guys to go in the top 15. So if for some reason the Broncos cannot find a trading partner, you say, all right, let's go find someone who can play opposite Patrick Surtain. Boom. So but quarterback feels like the definite go-to here. You know who doesn't need a quarterback, Sully? The Los Angeles Chargers. But what do they need? You tell me what they need. I think we're on the same page here too.
It's wide receiver. I mean, clearly, you see what happened to them this offseason due to cap constraints and free agency and all of that and trades. They don't have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Austin Eckler, who I would just count as a pass catcher, throw that in there as well. The guys that Justin Herbert has made his money throwing the football to over the course of his career are just not there anymore. And Quentin Johnston wasn't, didn't really pop as a rookie. It was relatively disappointing. And so you have an opportunity here to go a couple of different routes. You have the number 5 overall pick. You could just sit back, let a team trade up with Arizona at number 4, probably take a quarterback in the first 4 picks. You're sitting there pretty saying, I can either have Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., whichever wide receiver I feel is best positioned to help this team go forward, or you could be that team that, let's say Arizona decides they want Marvin Harrison Jr., whatever, position of need. There's still a ton of wide receiver talent. Maybe you say, hey, listen, this is a pretty deep wide receiver class, and we have needs that stretch beyond that as well. In fact, we could probably double dip at wide receiver considering that we lost so much talent at that position. What if Minnesota wants, 11 and 23, and you just address wide receiver at both of those spots? So they have some flexibility here, but clearly they need to find the new Binky for Justin Herbert at wide receiver, especially losing a guy like Keenan Allen, who was a 100-catch guy. That's a ton of volume that they need to kind of recoup.
It still blows my mind that Keenan Allen led the team in receiving yards last season, and the Chargers had the gall to ask him to take a pay cut. Imagine leading your team, being the best player at your position on your roster, and they're still like, yeah, you were good, but we need you to take less money, Keenan. That's a slap in the face, right?
It's bananas. And credit to him for saying, no, I'm not doing that.
Absolutely.
As much as he would have gotten a lot of praise when it comes out, Keenan Allen's restructured his deal to make things work. All of those reports, he'd get a ton of praise on social media. But at the end of the day, this is a business. These guys need to make money. He could be out, in 2 snaps, or, as the New York Jets have seen, your star quarterback can be gone in 4 snaps. You don't know what's going to happen in the NFL. So you have to keep your money where you can get when you can. Certainly, if you're financially flexible enough to make that sacrifice, good for you. But I'm not going to besmirch any player to say, no, I'm keeping my money. Why would I do that?
Yeah, I think one thing interesting with the Chargers is that we have Jim Harbaugh out here who has basically turned into P.T. Barnum, just the ultimate salesman. First, you have him saying, hey, look, the 5th pick is really the number 1 overall pick for teams that don't need a quarterback. And he's mostly right, because it feels like quarterbacks going to go with the top 4 picks. And then obviously we've talked a little about how he's just totally building up J.J. McCarthy to try and make him a top 5 pick, which makes the Chargers pick more valuable. So I do think it's interesting. It feels like a spot where the Chargers maybe trade out. Maybe if you like Marvin Harrison more and he gets taken at 4, then you're thinking, all right, we'll trade back. So if you're the top guy at receiver on your board gets taken, you have that option to trade back. And I feel like the right side of their offensive line could use a little bit of help. Maybe you don't want to do that with the 5th overall pick, but you trade back. This is a pretty strong draft for offensive linemen. So that could make some sense if you trade back. But yeah, receiver at 5 feels like the best for them. You know who else might need a receiver? We will talk about that team when we come back.
I am a prisoner of this hotel.
Why do they let you live?
You must never leave. They can take away everything. They can't take away who you are.
All right, Solly. Of course, the team I'm talking about is the Buffalo Bills. And that means we are moving to the AFC East. Look, we all saw what happened on Wednesday. You wrote the story. You were all over everything. I don't even know how you had a free minute. You did the emergency podcast. I read the story on .com. Solly, did you even have a free minute yesterday? Did you talk to your wife at all? What was your Wednesday like?
Hilarious enough, my mom was over, and she was so she was just coming by to say hi. She was in the neighborhood. And I'm like, I gotta go. I'm like, good to see you, Mom, but I gotta leave. I got stuff going on, and so that was funny. But no, it was a busy day. But but those days are great because you have the off season, especially in the next few months post draft. It gets pretty boring. And so you don't really, as much as we could talk about, someone's making a post-June cut or something like that, like, fine, great. That's all well and dandy. But I want the blockbuster trades. Those days are fun for me. The hours go by fast. So that was good.
So obviously Diggs gone. It feels like receiver is what the Bills need the most.
Yeah. I mean, it's, and this is what I said yesterday. It's kind of crazy how it got to this point and the cupboard is just completely bare in Buffalo. Me and Josh were talking about it. Like, the writing was on the wall that something had to give here with Stephon Diggs and the Buffalo Bills. It just was devolving into such a toxic situation that it almost felt inevitable that they were going to, in some way, shape, or form, part ways. And so the fact that you kind of have this looming over your franchise and you didn't really prepare for it. Yeah, okay, you drafted Dalton Kincaid, who is a pass-catching tight end who will help, cushion the blow of losing Diggs, certainly. But you look at this wide receiver room, you didn't keep Gabe Davis, who had proven to be a clutch option and a trusted option for Josh Allen. It just seems like they kind of got caught with their pants down a little bit. Like, ooh, we did not think it was going to devolve as quickly as it did. And so now it's going to be really interesting to see how they kind of try to land on their feet here. So I gave them a C-, I believe, in the grades, just because it doesn't feel like they were as prepared as they probably could have or should have been at this position. And now you're sitting here at number 28 overall. You're going to have to trade up to get one of these, probably these top tier guys, unless you're hoping for that second tier player to really burst onto the scene or what have you. But boy, you got to really start to look around and see if there are any trade opportunities to move up. And I don't know if there's going to be a clear-cut way to do it.
Yeah, they're really in a horrible spot in the first round, picking at 28th overall when it comes to getting a receiver, because at that spot, you're really staring at probably getting the 5th or 6th best receiver in the draft. Maybe you end up with Ladd McConkey, but you're not getting Marvin Harrison Jr., not getting Malik Neighbors unless you make some insane deal. And not that Ladd McConkey's bad, but I don't know that he is talented enough to replace someone like Stephon Diggs, especially as a rookie. So yeah, that is a huge question mark. And I agree with you. It does feel like that maybe the Bills were thinking, Stephon's been some drama, but we don't need to do anything. We got to keep him. And then things just went past the point of no return. And now you're dealing him away. I also think interesting with Buffalo is that they dumped both their safeties. Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, both gone. And look, I saw the Bengals film right here. I've seen what happens when you try and do that. They let Jesse Bates, Von Bell, they said, you know what, we're going to start over at the back end. And it's not as easy as it sounds, especially when you're starting over with two guys. So I think that the Bills absolutely need to look at that. And I think if a receiver doesn't fall in their lap at 28, that maybe they look at a safety.
Yeah, I see that. The secondary in general, I think, is a need for them. You talk about the safeties, but you let Tre'Davious White go as well. Like, I know that he was battling injuries over the course of his tenure there, but when he was right, you're talking about an all-pro caliber corner, and you're in a division now where there's Tyreek Hill, there's Jalen Waddle, there's Garrett Wilson with a healthy Aaron Rodgers. You are trying to still be in this Super Bowl window, and you haven't really, both ways. You're not helping yourself in the passing game, and you're not really helping yourself to defend the pass. In a conference where you have Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow on top of those guys that I just mentioned in the division, you're not really setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, that is rough. So Buffalo, good luck. Good luck. Do you feel like they're still a Super Bowl contender, or you keep them in that kind of top 5 or 6 teams, or you think they've dropped down a peg because of what's happened?
I think that they dropped down a little bit, but I mean, you still have Josh Allen. And when you have that elite quarterback, as we saw last year, we just talked about it with the Chiefs, and they might be a little bit of a different case, but we were talking about their wide receivers all year, and that didn't seem to stop them. So as long as they have that elite quarterback in Allen, I still think that they'll be in that conversation. Like, great, for instance, one of the things we wrote yesterday was biggest contenders to the Chiefs, top 5 contenders in the AFC. I had them at number 5. It's not bad, but that's right kind of where they are.
And mentioning that obviously they still have Josh Allen, but the difference with the Chiefs not having receivers is the Chiefs also have one of the most brilliant offensive minds in NFL history. And not to take anything away from Joe Brady, but he's not Andy Reid. So, that changes things a little bit too. All right, let's go to producer Harry's favorite team. So be gentle, Tyler, be gentle here. The Miami Dolphins. Look, Dolphins lost a couple huge free agents. We saw Christian Wilkins walk. He got a monstrous contract. We saw Rob Hunt walk. He got a monstrous contract. It felt like they were in the bargain bin at Walmart, kind of looking for free agents. And based on what they've done so far, what do you think they still need to do?
I think it's defensive line just kind of across the board. Obviously, you lose Christian Wilkins. You have a bunch of edge players coming back from pretty significant injuries. So if you can address that in some way, shape, or form at the NFL draft, I think that makes all the sense in the world. I did have a sneaky one, though, that I just do want to, throw out there. I think the easy one to say is the defensive line. And I don't know if producer Harry will agree with me or not, but to me, I still think offensive tackle, left tackle is something we need to talk about, because the elephant in the room is that Teron Armstead, for as talented as he is, the dude just can't stay healthy. You can't rely on him on a week-to-week basis. And, you look back over the last few years, I don't think he's played. No, he hasn't. He hasn't played a full season in his career at this point. So it's just kind of the story on him. But since he's been in Miami over the last 2 seasons, 13 games, 10 games, been a Pro Bowler, so that's great. But when we're talking about, and there you go, good stat right there, Armstead has played no more than 65% of the snaps while on the Dolphins. For a left tackle, and I know you have a left-handed quarterback, so it's not the blind side tackle, quote unquote, but he's still your number 1 corner, supposed to be the leader of your offensive line, kind of the anchor to this whole thing, hasn't really lived up to that expectation. So in a deep tackle class, I think that that's something that we should be looking at here for the Dolphins, to maybe get proactive and try to look at somebody for the future with that line.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And that is one thing you do have to take into consideration is you look at what is strong in this draft class, and you have to be looking forward and thinking, all right, Teron Armstead it should be out there this year, but we don't know because he hasn't been able to stay healthy, and maybe bringing someone in to replace him. And you know what? Maybe that guy doesn't replace him, but he can take a few snaps, give Armstead a few plays off, or just you have a guy there. You have an insurance policy is what you have. So I like that idea. I think that is absolutely something they should look into. And then, as you mentioned, the defensive line, Christian Wilkins is a huge loss, but again, you go to the draft for that. I think they go offensive lineman or defensive tackle in the draft. One of those 2 spots would probably make the most sense with that 21st overall pick. All right, let's move on to a team who's actually been adding offensive linemen, trying to protect their Aaron Rodgers investment, and that is the New York Jets. They've made some interesting moves, some big moves, if you will, Tyler. They got Mike Williams, traded for Hassan Reddick. They've been making some noise. What do you think they still need to do?
Yeah, I mean, really been making a ton of noise. And so I think that they're in an interesting spot where, they could do a bunch of different things at number 10 overall. They could, they have a ton of quarterback needy teams behind them. So if there's a quarterback there that everybody likes, put the for sale sign, get as much assets as you possibly can. I would not, look down upon them for doing that. I also sneaky think they could take a quarterback there, because that would make a lot of sense with Aaron Rodgers coming off an Achilles and being, super old at this point. That I think would be sneaky smart by them. But if we're talking about what their overall theme of the offseason has been, it's maximizing what you have with Aaron Rodgers, how much time you have with him right now. You're bringing Mike Williams in on a 1-year deal, Tyron Smith on a 1-year deal. So I think what would fall somewhat in line with that is bringing in another day 1 impact player. And I think that could be Brock Bowers. I would love for them to deepen their tight end room, because right now I think it's only Tyler Conklin, and that's relatively it. And so if you could add that type of young weapon into this offense with Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams, and Aaron Rodgers will certainly find him the football, I think that'd be a fascinating chess piece to kind of see how he moves around in that Jets offense.
Yeah, I like that. It would be interesting. I love that you threw out the maybe they should take a quarterback. If you want to completely blow up your franchise and have Aaron Rodgers literally quit on the spot, that is the move you would make. I can't even imagine how he would react if the Jets took a quarterback at 10th overall. That would be one of the all-timers. But you know what? When the Packers did it, Rodgers won 2 straight MVPs. So maybe it's the move that spurs him to even more greatness. Yeah, I love tight end. And this is an odd one. I actually think maybe wide receiver, and this isn't just draft, just wide receiver help in general. Because yes, they did sign Mike Williams, that we just had this conversation about Teron Armstead. Can Mike Williams stay healthy? He's had a little bit of trouble with that. And then you look at the rest of their depth chart at receiver, and it's not great. So you don't have a lot behind Garrett Wilson. Now, if Mike Williams plays like he did in 2022 or even 2021, then yeah, you have a great 1-2 punch with Wilson and Williams, but there's no guarantee that's going to happen. This is a guy who missed 14 games last season. So I would be at least considering receiver. And you mentioned the trade back. Maybe you trade back from 10th and you can get a receiver at 15th, 16th, 17th, whoever you end up trading with. So yeah, it sounds like we agree that get Aaron Rodgers some weapons should be the theme here. One more team. I'm not even going to talk. I don't even need to talk because this is Sully's team. He's got the banners behind him. Sully, what do the Patriots need to do to get another banner so that you can put another one behind you?
I joke, to pull the curtain back a little bit, we have a rundown that we write, our answers in so we can see what we're going to be talking about. I wrote everything as a joke. But it's clearly not everything, even though it kind of is. It's really quarterback, right? And they have the number 3 overall pick. They need to figure that out. I mean, look at what the Houston Texans, how differently we think about them than we did a year ago. The fact that they were able to find CJ Stroud and able to strike on that pick. And now it just feels like they're in such a hyperdrive because they have the young head coach. They have the young quarterback. They're able to make these moves like we saw with Stephon Diggs. When you have Stroud on his rookie contract, it's everything that an NFL franchise wants. And the Patriots are currently in a position to possibly do that because they have the number 3 overall pick, whether that's Jaden Daniels or Drake May. That's the route they probably will go down and should go down. The only thing that I would say is that they also are not the best landing spot for any of these quarterbacks. If we're being totally transparent, does any one of these quarterbacks want to go to New England, considering that the wide receivers are still somewhat questionable, the offensive line is terrible. So if you're a young quarterback, you say, okay, great, I'm the number 3 overall pick. But then you have to actually play in New England. They saw what the development or how it was lack of development with Mac Jones over the last few years. I would be very wary. So, this is a team that has a lot of needs. Could they trade out and then decide to go, trade with Minnesota for number 12, 11 or whatever it is, number 11, 23 and a first next year, and they just go the slow route? That's possible. They have a lot of needs, but to me, I would still go quarterback. Give yourself that shot, whether it's Drake May, Daniels, or JJ McCarthy. Give yourself that at bat to find that elite quarterback.
Well, I'm glad you ended with that because I was actually just going to ask you directly, Sully, if you were the general manager, are you taking the quarterback 100% or are you looking to trade down so you can plug some other holes? Because it does feel like offensive tackle, wide receiver are both needs, and those are 2 spots that are very deep in this draft.
It would have to be a historic call. You would have to tell me okay, maybe not historic, but I'm just using Minnesota as the example because they have the capital that would make sense. I guess if you tell me 11, 23, I don't know, Jordan Addison and, what, you got to blow me out of the water where I am being able to address offensive tackle. I'm maybe getting a wide receiver or have an opportunity to draft a wide receiver. And I could still take my at-bat with a quarterback. For all, we could just say, hey, listen, if Michael Penix is there at number 11, then sure, we draft Michael Penix as well, and you move on with those other selections. Fine. But I want to give myself, like I was saying, the best opportunity if I'm the GM to have an elite quarterback. And where do those quarterbacks typically come from? they come from inside the top 5. And I know that it's not perfect, and I know that's more likely to blow up in their face, but when you have that opportunity, I think you have to take it.
Yeah, that I agree with, that you need to take a gamble, but it absolutely is a gamble. There's just, I mean, you look historically at top draft picks. There's, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud right now. Right now, if you redid that draft, everyone is taking CJ Stroud over Bryce Young, even though Bryce Young was the number 1 overall pick. So you just never know. I mean, Zach Wilson and Trey Lance were the 2nd and 3rd overall picks in 2021. I don't think anyone would do those picks over again. So it really is, it's such a crapshoot. But, if you pass on Jaden Daniels and he goes and wins 3 Super Bowls with another team, you're regretting that forever. We don't want Tyler to be regretting anything forever. So let's hope the Patriots take a quarterback. All right. When we come back, we will cover the final 2 divisions.
You came down here to tell us that your date is missing.
I did not get ghosted. I think he was taken.
You were dating as a way to face your divorce.
Was I really the only thing holding you together, D?
Damn.
Ready or not,
I am in search of a man with whom I had a beautiful connection.
you can't hide.
If anything feels off, we'll go. Off.
Murderer.
Who are you?
Diara.
Gonna find you.
All right, Sully, now we already talked about Stephon Diggs and how the Bills traded him away. So now we're going to move to the AFC South and talk about the team that acquired him. Look, we love talking about Cinderellas in the NCAA tournament. The Texans feel like a Cinderella. They were really good last season, and it looks like they're even better. They have had an absolutely crazy offseason, not just getting Diggs, but also getting Joe Mixon, making a couple key free agent signings on defense. But they still have a couple holes, right? What do you think they still need to do, Sully?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about that too, like, bringing in Daniil Hunter, keeping Bobby Slowick as offensive coordinator. Like, those are the things too that just are a recipe for a massive leap on top of, obviously, Stephon Diggs is going to be the sexy storyline, but this team is ready to launch in 2024. The only thing I guess I would look at would say somewhere in the secondary, maybe another corner. I know they brought him Jeff Okudah. Maybe, I would maybe try to upgrade there on day 2. You got to remember they don't have a 1st-round pick, so they're in a little bit of a different spot here. But to me, I think secondary, and we're kind of nitpicking, but you still have Devin Singletary, or Derek Singletary. So Stingley, I'm sorry, I don't know why I said Singletary, but that to me, I think secondary would make the most sense.
Yeah, it does feel like that other spot where maybe Jeff Okudah is currently penciled in, that D'Amico Ryans knows that's an issue, because it looks like they just went out and said, let's just sign every free agent corner we can find, because there's also Lonnie Johnson, CJ Henderson, Mike Ford on top of Jeff Okudah. They re-signed Desmond King. So there's just, let's stack as many corners as we can and see if we can find someone who can fill that opposite spot. So it really does feel like that is the spot, and probably the spot they end up targeting in the draft. And as you said, no 1st-round pick, so they'll have to wait and hope someone falls in their lap at that point. Maybe I feel like you could add some tight end depth behind Dalton Schultz, but it is Nick Caserio has done a number, because this roster is pretty solid, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, this team feels like, they feel like a team that is just on hyperdrive. Like they are hitting everything so perfectly. They nail the draft by bringing in CJ Stroud. They bring in Will Anderson, the back-to-back. It feels like 2 pillars that you're putting on either side of the ball. You have the right head coach. You kept the offensive coordinator, which is such a huge thing for a development in year 2. You're doing exactly what you should be doing when you're a team that has a rookie quarterback. You're investing in throwing caution to the wind. You're saying, hey, let's bring in all this talent while we don't have to pay the quarterback. It's just, to me, it's the blueprint of what you should do when you have a quarterback like CJ Stroud in a rookie deal.
All right, well, let's go from a team that is perfectly building a roster with a quarterback on a rookie deal to a team that is not doing a good job of building a roster with a quarterback on a rookie deal, and that is Jacksonville. Who knows what's happening there anymore? Calvin Ridley shockingly leaving in one of the most surprising turnabouts. I mean, just the fact that he ended up in Tennessee is stunning. I still can't believe that happened. Jacksonville has a few issues. What do you think their biggest one is right now?
I don't know if it's biggest, but I would still say edge rusher, because you have Josh Allen on the franchise tag. To me, sometimes we have to be proactive, right? Like we were just talking about Teron Armstead in Miami. Like, he's still there. He's still going to be an impact player, but for how much longer? And when you have Trevor Lawrence and you feel like your offense is relatively taking shape. I mean, you're bringing Gabe Davis, you have Christian Kirk, you have Travis Etienne, you still have Evan Ingram. You have those pieces to still put up points. Really, what takes down Patrick Mahomes, what takes down all of those other quarterbacks, an elite pass rush, and one that you can have for the foreseeable future. So for me, if you could find an edge rusher, I think that would be a sneaky good move for them.
Yeah, and that's kind of looking to the future, because you don't know if Josh Allen's going to be there in 2025. They can't get a long-term deal done before July. And I think the same thing kind of at left tackle, where they have Cam Robinson starting, his backups Walker Little. Both those guys are going to be free agents after the upcoming season, and that is not a hole you want to worry about filling. And so maybe you get someone in there this year so that you don't have a rookie manning that spot in 2025. Maybe you go out and get a free agent. I don't know, but that's something that down the road, when you're building toward the future, and maybe a little bit of help at corner. But it's the thing is, like, Jacksonville's not terrible. They just feel like a 9-8 team, 8-9 team, right? I didn't feel like they got better, but I didn't feel like they got worse.
Right. Like, it felt like for a minute there, they were going to be the Texans, where it's like, okay, they have that comeback against the Chargers in the playoffs. You're like, all right, maybe there's something here. And for whatever reason, it feels like this franchise is kind of plateaued over the last few years. They need some sort of spark, and whether that's on the offensive side or on the defensive side, it just feels like there needs to be some injection of life into this team. And sometimes that can happen on the defensive side when you're sacking the quarterback 15 times a year. So if you can find that dude, that certainly helps.
All right, let's move on to the third team in the AFC South. I think the Colts, who we're about to talk about, had one of the more underrated seasons. I mean, they lost their starting quarterback early. Gardner Minshew comes in, and they still finish with a winning record. If you can do that with a backup quarterback, that means the rest of your roster is pretty good. So what do you think they still need to do to get better?
Yeah, and they were able to retain a lot of guys too, like Julian Blackmon, Michael Pittman, Kenny Moore. Like, they made some sneaky moves, even though, like I said, there wasn't like a huge splash, but like there was some nice moves there. I think another pass catcher in this offense, because we're looking at Anthony Richardson in the small flash that we saw him. He was really had a ton of ability, but he's still a raw prospect. And, you saw that even with the injuries last year. He's got to learn to kind of protect himself a little bit. And once we see him, hopefully over the course of a full season, I think it's going to kind of become clear that he needs another pass catcher alongside Michael Pittman. I mentioned it with the Jets, but Brock Bowers would make a lot of sense for me here too. What do young quarterbacks like the best? It's these tight ends that they can just quickly get the ball out to. And Brock Bowers is one of those prospects that we look at and say, man, he could be a day one impact guy. So if he's still sitting there at number 15, I think that makes a lot of sense to say, hey, boy, we can now have Michael Pittman on one side. We can kind of use Brock Bowers almost as like our Dalton Kincaid or Travis Kelce for Anthony Richardson. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it is really weird to think about the Colts offense, that it was decent last year, but they really didn't have a number one outside, or really another receiving option outside of Michael Pittman. So definitely could stand to use some receiving depth. And let's not forget, they lost Zach Moss. Look, he was one of those security guys that you had in the backfield playing behind Jonathan Taylor. And now he's not there anymore. The other thing I would say is cornerback. I know you have an established guy like Kenny Moore. We mentioned they signed Julian Blackmon and re-signed him. And it feels like they did that because they're like, we don't want to start over in the secondary. We already have enough issues. Let's re-sign Kenny. Let's re-sign Julian and see if we can figure something out. So I do feel like they could stand to add some cornerback depth because they don't have a lot of experience there. All right, let's move to the great state of Tennessee with the Titans. They have had I would say also one of the most underrated offseasons. They have just been making move after move, whether it's Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, Lloyd Cushenberry added a little bit of help at center. They got Chidibo Awuzie from Cincinnati. And L'Jarius Sneed, let's not forget about L'Jarius Sneed. So they have improved at a lot of positions, but they have so many holes that they definitely still need help in other places. What are those other places, Sully?
I think offensive tackle. You look at all the mock drafts. It's funny. I was, we're doing research for all this, and you go to CBSSports.com, you click on all the mock drafts, you can see all of our experts. I think everybody has them drafting Joe Alt from Notre Dame. I mean, even Tom Fornelli has them trading up to draft Joe Alt. So it's pretty much across the board. Tackles the need. And if you're sitting there, whether you want to trade up, I don't think you would need to trade up. Maybe specifically if you like Joe Alt, then maybe you have to trade up. But the fact that so many quarterbacks are expected to go off the board, and those other teams are probably going to address wide receiver. You talk about the Cardinals, Chargers, and Giants. I could see all of those teams drafting a wide receiver. You might be the team that has the opportunity to take the top tackle on the board. And if that's Joe Alt in your eyes, I think you absolutely do it.
Yeah, and the Titans are also in an interesting spot because if you don't have the quarterback go fourth overall, let's say there's only 3 quarterbacks taken, and that fourth quarterback's going to get taken at some point, and they haven't been taken by the time the Titans are on the clock, and now the Vikings are calling you, or the Broncos are calling you, or the Raiders are calling you, you're in a spot where you certainly could trade down, and then maybe you get probably not Joe Alt. I don't know that he would last into the teens. But you get one of the top 3 offensive linemen, and then you can plug another hole. But yeah, it does absolutely feel that.
Let me just add one thing in here too, because I think we're in agreement that tackle makes the most sense, right? But let's just go a little bit outside the box here. Why aren't they doing at least a little bit of homework on quarterback? How confident are we in what Will Levis did a year ago so great that we are just going to completely turn a blind eye to this entire quarterback class? Again, we just talked about it with the Patriots. It's a crapshoot. This guy has at least shown you that he can play in the NFL. I get it. But if one of these guys that you have a relatively high grade on is sitting there at number 7, if you didn't think that if Drake May falls, let's just play the game. And for whatever reason, these teams don't trade up, you don't at least have that conversation. I just think they're an interesting team because it feels like we're just completely dismissing quarterback because we're assuming they go with Will Levis, and they probably will. But I don't think it was like a CJ Stroud year where you're like, okay, clearly they have the quarterback. If they like a guy, I don't know. I just think that's something we should be at least considering.
Sully, they have Mason Rudolph. They signed him.
That's true. I forgot.
They've got the ultimate insurance policy, man. You saw it.
That's true. What am I thinking?
I don't think that is completely crazy. I mean, you think about Brian Callahan, new head coach. He saw what a franchise quarterback can do. And so he is very well aware of how much a franchise quarterback means to a team. And he really is, it looks like, trying to build Cincinnati South down there. And so, look, if someone falls, maybe they think about it. I don't think they're going to give up. They have too many holes that I don't think they're going to give up any compensation to trade up. But like you said, if someone falls to 7th overall, then it gets a little dicey.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where you go, you're inside the top 10. You have the number 7 overall pick. It's a very similar topic to what we talk about up here in New England with number 3. You don't know if you're ever going to be there again. You don't know if you're going to have that opportunity inside the top 5 up here, but inside the top 10 for Tennessee. And if there's a guy there, I'm just saying you at least have the conversation. More likely than not, they choose a tackle, or if a quarterback's there, you again put the for sale sign up and try to get a haul. I get all that. I'm just saying that let's not completely just look at Will Levis as, okay, he's clearly the guy. I don't know if he put together a season that warrants that. Again, he'll start this year as QB1, but it wouldn't shock me if we come into next offseason saying, yep, here comes Tennessee. They're in the quarterback market.
And I do think there are usually 1 or 2 picks a year in the first round that just totally blow your jaw-dropping. Oh, my God, did that just happen? And the Titans selecting a quarterback would be it, but it wouldn't be 100% shocking. But I do think Callahan, I think he's going to give the benefit of the doubt to Will Levis, give him 1 year to prove whether or not he can be a starting quarterback, and then reassess next year. But this is a strong QB class, and so it's not crazy for them to at least think about it. Let's move to a team that does not have to think about adding a quarterback because they have the reigning MVP. They also have the scariest backfield in the history of football with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. And of course, we were talking about the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, Derrick Henry, the huge move they made this offseason. Sully, what else does this team need to do to stay atop their perch in the AFC North.
You talk about, the greatest, 1-2 rushing punch in Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. I'll ask you this, though. Who's blocking for him? Like, what does this offensive line look like? And I'm not just talking about, okay, they need to add a tackle here or a guard here. They kind of need to reconstruct their entire offensive line. They trade away Morgan Moses. You have Ronnie Stanley entering a contract year. Both of your starting guards from last year have since left. There's a lot of reshaping that needs to be going on here with Baltimore's offensive line. And that's one of those things where, again, it's not the Stephon Diggs blockbuster taking over headlines, but it's something that we're going to be talking about come November if Baltimore is not able to live up to what they were able to do last year. Derrick Henry's averaging less than 4 yards a carry, and Lamar Jackson's running for his life every week. Like, they need to figure out their offensive line. That's, to me, is the number one priority on a multitude of levels.
Yeah, it kind of blows my mind. I follow a couple Ravens people on Twitter, and they talk about it, but I feel like maybe this isn't getting enough national talk that the Ravens, yes, they have Lamar Jackson. Yes, they have Derrick Henry, but they're blowing up their offensive line. As you mentioned, 3 starters from last year gone. John Simpson, Kevin Zeitler. You mentioned the trade to trading away Morgan Moses. And so you're almost starting from scratch. You're the defending AFC champions. You have a target on your back. Everybody's coming for you, and it's great that you have Derrick Henry, but if you don't have anybody to block for him, having Derrick Henry doesn't really help you. I mean, I guess it helps you no matter what because he's Derrick Henry, but it helps you less when you're dealing with that. So I think it'll be interesting to see what Baltimore does at 30th overall, because the chances are there's not going to be a top 5 offensive lineman left on the board for you. So do you reach and take one of the lower guys, or do you go to another position in need? Maybe you get some pass rushing help. They didn't lose huge names. Jadeveon Clowney's gone. Tyus Bowser's gone. We don't know what Kyle Van Noy is going to do. So maybe you need a little bit of help there, but it does feel like offensive line is the big issue.
Yeah, Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma seems to be almost a resounding player in these mock drafts that we're seeing from Wilson and others on our site.
All right, let's move from Baltimore to the team that used to be Baltimore before they moved to Baltimore, the Cleveland Browns. All right, well, let's see what they do. They signed Jameis Winston. That was exciting. They traded for Jerry Jeudy. That was exciting. It's been kind of an exciting offseason. Sully, this team, pretty good last year. They managed to get to the playoffs, won 11 games. What do they need to do to get better for 2024?
Great defense. We'll see what happens at quarterback, but they helped them obviously getting Jerry Jeudy. I think that running back is kind of a big need here. Obviously, you have Nick Chubb, but we're not talking about the Nick Chubb that we all know and love. We're talking about a Nick Chubb that's coming back from another devastating knee injury. You have Jerome Ford. To me, it just feels like you could have used one of the, we saw a lot of running backs go early in free agency, and I'm not saying go out and sign Josh Jacobs or Derrick Henry or something like that, but you should try to, land on your feet here to give yourself some insurance. And I think you could probably do that at the NFL draft, maybe a high day 2 pick or something along those lines. I don't have their draft capital in front of me, but to me, that would make a lot of sense if all of a sudden they're somewhere in day 2, bringing aboard a running back that they can feel confident they can maybe carry the load along with Jerome Ford while Nick Chubb's getting back up to speed.
Yeah, I think injuries, I'm pretty sure the Browns, we talked about how the Ravens are losing 3 of their 5 starting offensive linemen from last season. If everyone's healthy, I believe the Browns have all 11 week 1 starters back, which is just crazy to think about when there's so much turnover in the NFL. And really, to your point, kind of at running back, and what I'm going to say at tackle, is that it feels like what they need is insurance for people who were injured. They had Jedrick Wills, who missed a good chunk of last season. They're starting left tackle. Obviously, Nick Chubb missing a good chunk of the season with his injury. And so you don't know how those guys are going to look in their return. So it feels like insurance to kind of fill those spots. And at running back, I know the Browns made a couple moves, and they didn't hit any home runs. I think they signed Dante Foreman and Nyheim Hines. Maybe Hines becomes your return guy and not really so much in that running back role, but not enough that you should feel comfortable about what they're doing. But this team doesn't have a lot of holes, do they?
No, it seems like, again, it's all going to come down to Deshaun Watson. I mean, that's really what this is now at this point. He has the big contract. They have a great defense. They brought him another weapon. Yeah, sure. Could they use another running back? Yes. We're kind of, clipping at the edges here of what this team needs. They don't really need that much. What they need is Deshaun Watson to be a capable quarterback. And if he is, this team is going to be really, really dangerous. It's just that I have my doubts of it actually coming to fruition with him specifically.
All right, let's move on to a team that has had one of the wildest offseasons. I feel like the Steelers usually play it pretty quiet during the offseason. They make a couple moves, and you're like, oh, that will get them to 9-8. That will get Tomlin over the hump this year, like he does every year. And now they go out, they get Russell Wilson, they trade for Justin Fields. You throw in Van Jefferson. They signed Cordero Patterson like 3 hours after the new kickoff rule was passed. They brought in Patrick Queen, which is just a really good signing. It feels like one, especially in Tomlin's defense. So what does this team have left to do?
I agree with you. I think that they've kind of just gone crazy. Like, you're like, oh, wow, okay, this is going to be a totally different Steelers team than we saw a year ago, obviously, with all the moves they made at quarterback. I would maybe like to see them add another wide receiver. Again, we're talking about this being a deep tackle and wide receiver class. I think you can kind of go both of those positions. But to me, you get rid of Deontay Johnson. You're going to elevate George Pickens. You bring in Van Jefferson, but I don't know if Van Jefferson really does much for me in terms of like, okay, you're going to be able to be our second wide receiver, maybe quote unquote third wide receiver if you want to count Pat Freiermuth as that number 2 pass catching option. But to me, if you could get like I'm just trying to, find names that relatively could be in their range. Like, I don't know, if LSU's Brian Thomas Jr. falls to you at that spot, like that would be really fun to see what that looks like in that offense. That I think is something that I would look at because Russell Wilson is not the quarterback that he used to be. He needs help. He needs, the DK Metcalfs and Tyler Lockett's and the Jerry Judys and the Cortland Suttons. He needs people to kind of carry him. And if it's not him, you still need all of that with Justin Fields. He needs pass catching help as well. So to me, I think it's wide receiver. That to me would be the most enticing thing, particularly in round 1 if someone falls.
Man, maybe the Steelers should have traded for Stephon Diggs, huh?
Sure, why not?
They've been going really crazy.
You see, can you imagine George Pickens and Stephon Diggs on the sideline together when Russell Wilson is throwing it to who knows who in
Freiermuth 3 yards downfield?
That 100% should have happened. We would create a red zone version of just looking at them on the sidelines.
At all times.
An octobox of those guys.
That would be hilarious. I think the other thing, the Steelers, they just cut their center, Mason Cole, a couple weeks ago. So that is kind of a question mark to me. Maybe you look for some center help. This is kind of the draft where you could get that help. There are a couple top tier centers that I feel like will definitely be available when the Steelers pick at 20th overall. So maybe you draft a center, maybe you draft a wide receiver, but they don't have a lot of big holes. Maybe you add another corner, and obviously they traded for Dante Jackson in the Deontay Johnson deal, but that's Steelers bidding, hey, we needed some secondary help. And so you hope Dante Jackson works out. All right, Sully, let's get to the final team on our list. Since this is my team, I will tell you what I think their problems are, and then you can talk me off the ledge because I have a lot here. I have a whole list of things that I'm worried about with the Bengals. And really what they could do with their first round draft pick. Defensive tackle. They lost DJ Reader. They haven't really brought in anyone that replaces him. He was their run stuffing guy. They were horrible at stuffing they run. They gave up more yardage than any other team in the AFC last season. Couldn't stop the run, couldn't stop the pass, couldn't do anything. Tight end. I feel like they could use some help at tight end. Not as big because they did sign Mike Gesicki, so I'm not sure that becomes the biggest need at 18th overall when they're on the board. Wide receiver. Who do you have behind Jamar Chase and T. Higgins? And also T. Higgins looking more and more like he's going to leave after the upcoming season, so you could use receiving help, a little bit of cornerback help, and then obviously I'll let you go with the last one, but what's the offensive one? What's the big one they need on offense?
To me, it's offensive tackle because as somebody who has watched Trent Brown over the last few years, you're rolling the dice, man. That is a very when it hits and when he is motivated and is paid accordingly and is ready to go, he is a beast. He's phenomenal. He is, if he feels like he has a chance to win, is going to get paid and all of that, he is going to be a very sturdy tackle for you. And I think that you will get that for this season if everybody stays healthy, Joe Burrow and all of those guys. I will say this, though. I wouldn't necessarily hand him a bag. I don't know if I would be, I don't know if this is a guy that I would say, hey, okay, great. You had a good season for us a year ago. Here's a blah, 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 X amount of year deal for X amount of money. Don't think that would make sense. So I think tackle, again, in a deep tackle draft, that might be something to be proactive about because you just don't know what you're going to get out of that spot. But I do agree with you, pass catcher, just because you don't know what's going to happen with T. Higgins and all of that, whether that's Brock Bowers or Brian Thomas Jr., who I mentioned with the Steelers, but could make just as much sense in Cincinnati, former LSU guy, like that would, that could work. Those are the positions that I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, the tackle one to me is interesting because, like you said, they added Trent Brown. He's going to be motivated because he only has a 1-year contract, which maybe that's what you have to do with him. Just keep giving him 1-year contract. And I had to do the Bengals mock draft. It came out on Wednesday, I believe. And someone asked me why I didn't have an offensive tackle going to them. And the Bengals have been like the most unpredictable team in the draft for the past couple years. After Burrow got rushed by Aaron Donald at the end of Super Bowl 56, everyone was saying they have to take a tackle in the 2022 draft, which, was a few months later. You know what they didn't do, Sully? They did not use their first round pick on a tackle. They didn't use any of their picks on a tackle. They didn't take any offensive linemen in 2022. So then we get to 2023 and everybody's saying, you know what the Bengals need to do with their first round pick? They need to take an offensive tackle. You know what the Bengals did in 2023? They didn't take an offensive tackle with their first round pick. They didn't even take an offensive lineman in 2023. They took a guard in 2022, but no tackles. So we've gone 2 straight years with no tackles. This team just seems like we're going to keep building defense and try and plug our holes in free agency. So I think if we don't see one of the top 3 tackles in the draft fall to them 18, that they'll probably go with the defensive lineman. But if one of those guys do fall, then I think they will be more than happy to take one of the top guys on their draft board, whether that's Amarius Mims, J.C. Latham, I think would probably be the 2 best fits. So that is all the Bengals talk. So are the Bengals going to win the Super Bowl this year? That's what I want to know.
Could. Very well could. Tell me what happens with T. Higgins, because I think that's kind of a big X factor with him.
Do you think T. Higgins gets traded during the draft?
I could see that. I could see this being kind of like, A.J. Brown type of thing where you're like, oh boy, here we go. And then, I just don't know who they would trade him to, though. Like, are you really going to trade him to Buffalo? Like, does that help anybody? Does that make sense at all for Cincinnati? I don't think so. Like, if the Buffalo is going to be that team that trades for a wide receiver, it's probably like Brandon Ayuk, NFC to AFC. You deal with it at the Super Bowl if you meet him there. I don't know if you're Cincinnati. I just don't know who that landing spot is where you would feel comfortable outside of like a New England team who would certainly love a wide receiver, but
or
you
like
don't have to worry about them. Or the Giants. Sure. Exactly. But again, I just don't know what that return would be.
All right, Sully, that is it. We just covered all 16 AFC teams. That is the end of today's show. We will be back on Monday with NFL Draft Sleepers, and we'll also be talking about small school prospects, which I love small school prospects. If you're listening or if you're watching, remember to like, remember to post some comments, remember to leave a 5-star review, do something, leave in the comments, say, I love when Sully's on the show. I love when Breech is on the show. You can write Go NC State. You can say, I just bet $500 against NC State. Do whatever you want. Just remember to join us on Monday. For Tyler Sullivan, I'm John Breech. See you guys next week.